Okay. Um, This is Little Pistols, Big Ideas. I think that's what it's called. It's a forum. So you need to put forth questions, ideas, something so we can discuss them. I have no prepared material, so somebody needs to kick this off with a question, a suggestion, or something they'd like to discuss. Sir.
I work on a very restricted space and city, and I'd like your comments on some small antennas that I should investigate, and maybe something with strengths and weaknesses. If you had any recommendations, I'd really appreciate that.
Okay, the question was, and what's your name? Mark? Mark lives on a small city property, and he'd like some ideas about what to do for antennas. How small, what's the dimension of your property?
It's 38 by 83.
38 by 83. And are there any things significant, aside from your house, which I'm presuming is somewhat in the middle, are there any significant vertical structures, trees, anything in the property?
No, I just had cut down a big tree, so it's pretty well nothing.
Okay. So are you planning, or are you able to put supports up on the corners of the lot if you need to?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, the best, you want to work as many bands as you can, I presume.
Yeah, right at the moment, the best I've been able to do, I also have a high noise floor. It's a terrible location, and I should move.
Well, that was my first suggestion.
St. Lucia is very nice. Good idea. So I'm running a delta loop where I break all the rules because I put it in horizontally at about 20 feet. Works well on 20, works acceptably on 40. Noise floor is not too bad. That's the best I've been able to do.
Well, I mean, you never know what happens in real life because things are not always as the books say they are, and the math is always different no matter where you are. Now, I just came out of one of Frank's antenna discussions, W3LPLs, and he would have told you that that's an enormous cloud warmer that you built, and most of the energy isn't getting anywhere near the ionosphere. He told me that about my 260-meter loop that I had years ago when we first met, but my loop was up at 70 feet, and it actually worked very well. I don't know about your horizontal loop. My suggestion would be to try to figure out something that uses kind of what I've done, which is using the property lines in their full extent for separate monoband antennas, or maybe make a multi-band, two-band antenna on the long lines. Certainly one place to start would be on one of the long sides to put up a 40-meter dipole. How high do you think you can make a support?
I suppose I could get up 30 feet maybe.
Not ideal, but it would work. I mean, the higher the better, obviously. You might try an inverted V so you wouldn't have to put up as many supports, but I would encourage you to put supports up on all the corners and run something along the property lines in each direction. For one thing, they're going to be close, but they'll be orthogonal. So at least the ones that are on the corners, you'll have the least amount of interaction. So if you make those bands that are somewhat related, if those are like, if you did 20 and 40 that way, you wouldn't have nearly the problems that if you did 40 this way and 20 over here, right? So I think that's a starting place, and maybe you can make the one that's for 40 some kind of multi-band. Yes?
In the case where you've got these multiple antennas, you have to make an effort to decouple them when you're not using them so they don't interfere and allow them. What's your recommended course of action?
My experience, and I can't speak to the broad technical part of this, but my experience has been they're going to interact. If it's bad enough that you need to do something, then you need to detune the antenna in some way. Either make sure that, now I have fooled around with feed line lengths in that same exact situation, and I've adjusted the feed line lengths to minimize that. But if you start out with a half wavelength of feed line and make them dipoles and see how that works. If you put up a 20-meter dipole on the shorter side and a 40-meter on the longer side, I think that's a good start. I wouldn't bother a whole lot. I'm not even sure. Well, I wouldn't bother going above 20 meters anyway. The way things are going to be the next few years, I think not. I think it's a non-productive use of your property. I would rather see you try something on the other property line for 160, as crazy as it sounds. I've heard of people successfully using inverted Ls with as small a vertical section as 35 feet. So that's, I think, 80 meters on one side, 20 meters on the other, and if you can manage an inverted L, that's a place. But I'd start with the 80 and 40 and just put up dipoles as high as you can get them. Pay attention to the feed line length, start with a half wavelength and see if you have to do anything. I don't think you're going to have any trouble. You're running low power, I presume, 100 watts. Yeah, I don't think you're going to have any trouble with them orthogonal like that. Just try to keep the corners from touching. You said it's 83 one way, and what's the other dimension? 40. So you've got 10 extra feet in each direction, so I would just get them away from each other if you can from the corner. I think you'll be all right. Start on those two bands. Any other suggestions for is it Steve? Yeah, for Mark, I'm sorry. Any other suggestions for Mark? Yeah.
Kind of got the same situation in central Tennessee. I'm up on top of the rock, basically, Montego Mountain, and so don't have much, earth to go down. So getting vertical supports other than scraggly trees is pretty tough. So I'm figuring probably a 40 or maybe 50 foot, probably fiberglass, mast. And
Well, tell me. The question was about, he said somewhat the same situation on a big rock on top of a hill with scraggly trees. Tell me about your scraggly trees.
Well,
Scraggly doesn't.
something up and over, it's maybe 50 feet, but the branches are just rife with parasitic growth and stuff like that, so it really can't go through the trees. I mean, I could probably borrow an alpha amp and remove some of these, unneeded.
Is the height of the tree 50 feet or is it 25 feet high? What's the height?
The height of the tree is 50 feet if I just launch right up and over.
Oh, I would try to use that tree as a support for at least one part of my antenna, if not both.
I could do that on one corner and halfway up the property line on the other side, but then we've got, of course, the power lines coming in, so can't,
They come close to that tree?
close to one of the trees, yeah. There's probably three that I could make use of.
I have a friend that lives on a property, I don't know, what's the size of yours?
Probably about 140 by 80.
Okay, his property's 140 by 85. That's actually, I have 125 by 75 in mine. I have a friend with a lot not much different from mine, and all he has is these skinny pine trees that look like they're unattractive. They have branches that tend to break, but they work fine to support antennas as long as you are intelligent about the feed line. We use RG8X as the feed line, as the drop, and then switch to 213 when it gets on the ground. Probably not even necessary to do that, and use reasonably good line to support it. I'd encourage you to see if you could do something between the trees. I wouldn't rule them out at all. Why are you afraid? What is this vegetation that you?
Well, it's
concerned.
just that the wires that have gone up there
Yeah?
have usually not survived very long.
What kind of wire have you used?
I've used everything from THHN to down to the like Wireman 532 or whatever.
What is that?
18 gauge Teflon.
Oh, well, if you have a situation where the wire itself is actually being abraded, I'd think about something like copper weld, which has a steel strength member, or if you can get your hands on military surplus communications wire, it's not pleasant to work with because the strength members in it are very small and they act like needles when the ends get into your flesh. But they also have they have a conductor in there as well as a strength member, exceptionally strong, and you can tie them in knots, you can do all kinds of things. Now, did you have a wire running over the branch or just a support line running over the branch?
Generally just a support line running over the branch.
So, and the wire broke?
We do get some pretty good winds up there because I'm on a bluff face. And so when the wind comes in from the west or southwest, we can get 30-mile-an-hour gusts coming into the cove, which acts as a venturi. Make sure you're getting this back.
I will.
60, 70 mile an hour.
The problem is that there's a lot of wind in this location, and when it comes through it, everything vibrates and moves around. Now, you've run, but the wires haven't been over the branches. You've had support line over the branches, but the wire is what broke, not.
Although the wires eventually, depending on the branches, yeah.
But the wires broke, or the cord or the support line broke. Both. Here's my experience. I live in an area, I get significant wind where I am. I'm not far from the Chesapeake Bay. Those wire antennas that I've described have been up for years, a long, long time. And I leave them dead loose. They don't look anything like straight across. They have nice fat catenaries in them. I'm not worried about losing a few feet. You can take a support line, and when you pull on it, it doesn't go whang. It's nice and soft. No weights, no bungee, none of that. I just keep a lot of slack in the line. My trees move around like crazy, but I haven't lost a wire in as long as I can remember, and I'm only using Home Depot THNN wire. And I use a rope that I buy from a company called Frank Wynne, Wynnne, I think it is. Maybe it's Winne in Baltimore. It's inexpensive. He advertises on eBay. He sells it to all the fishermen in our area and all up and down the Atlantic coast, and they use it for crab pots and things like that. It comes in various diameters. I use the 1/4 inch or smaller line, and it's very rugged, and it takes abrasion very well. And I make sure that every 2 years in my location, you might want to do it every year, I let them down, I look at it, and if there's an area that's abraded, I either run the line up to it or I just run a new piece of line. It's really cheap. I paid $22 for 1,000 feet recently. Shipping was $10, so it cost me $32. We used it at NSS and it was fine. Anything more on this subject? I think that the key is keep the lines really loose. I don't know what you had, but I find if they're really loose, then there's no tension, there's nothing to happen. You don't get fatigue. Yeah.
And like I'm on the Chesapeake too, and where the winds really whip around, and boy, sometimes the trees are going, I leave things a bit loose. And I go down Home Depot and at the ends of the ropes, just past the insulators, I get their longest bungee cord and have a wire loop, one side tie to one end of the bungee cord, the other, leave a loop there in case the bungee cord breaks. But have a little bit of tension on it, and it seems to do the job when the wires are whipping around.
Yeah, I mean, you can try the bungee cord thing. If you can't, if it's uncomfortable for you to leave it as loose as I'm suggesting, then try the bungee cord. Bungee cord breaks after a while, so you have to replace it periodically, especially outdoors. I use it on our boat for a few things, and I throw it away pretty much every year and replace it. Any questions? Any questions about something that's not supporting an antenna or an antenna? I know that's a big deal for us little guys, so I'm perfectly happy to continue discussing that, but I just wanted to open the door if there was something else that you want to talk about. Dead air. QRZ? Anybody, any contact? Yes. Okay.
I'm relatively new to broadcasting. I was here last year and was really impressed with all of the emphasis on receiving antennas. Both of my radios have only one output jack, which has a receiving end ability on the radio. So I wondered about the options for TR switching, whether or not anyone has experience with that. If they do,
Anybody as old as I am and has been a ham as long will have experience. The question was, the transceiver that he has only one Antenna jack. He has no separate receive antenna input. And there was emphasis over the last 2 years, he's heard a lot about receive antennas. So how can he take advantage of a separate receive antenna with only one input on the transceiver? And the answer is a relay. That's a pretty simple solution. Put a relay in a box, make sure that you're switching. If you want to have double insurance, you can short out the receive antenna to ground, but if you don't have a preamp on it or anything, you don't need to do that. So a simple relay that selects the receive antenna or the transmit antenna is fine. You don't have to protect your receiver against anything because you don't have a separate, it's actually a better way to do it sometimes than using the same transceiver. You're going to be running 100 watts with it? Excuse me? QRP, well, even better. Just tie it right to the input. No. use a small relay and make sure that it fails safe on the transmit side. In other words, energize it to go over to receive. And that way you'll never transmit, if the relay fails, you'll never transmit into nothing. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
What about 160 on small lots?
Well, on my small lot, what I use for 160, and the inverted L is really popular, and the inverted L works well. The reason I don't use one, the question was about how about 160 on a small lot. The reason I don't use an inverted L at the moment is because of where my neighbor's house is, my house is, and other things in the property. I can't get any radials out from any corner of the property. And I have the little bit of open patch I have has an AB 577 military mast with a small tri-bander on it. So I have no place to run radials from the corners, which is where my vertical would have to go. I mean, I could run one radial maybe. It doesn't make any sense. But I've had success with a counterpoise. Now, I haven't tried the folded over counterpoise yet. But the antenna that I use is, I thought I invented it. It turns out people used it in the 1920s. It's called a lazy U. And it's, if you can imagine a dipole, and you strung the thing vertically, but it was so long, you didn't have enough vertical, you'd bend the bottom leg over, bend the top leg over. So it looks like a U on its side fed in the center of the vertical. Now lately I've modified that and I now feed it at the bottom, so it's truly an inverted L with a single counterpoise. It's the best I can do in my lot. Is it ideal? Absolutely not. But it works for me. I'm able to trim the antenna by trimming the counterpoise. I can bring it into resonance. And with 100 watts, I worked, 60 some odd countries on 160 with it. Now, I've got an amplifier and I've gotten more bold with it, but, yes?
What's the length of the counterpart?
The length of both the top section and the bottom section are 90 feet each for me, and the vertical section 60 feet. And it's 90, 60, 90. So it's a U on its side, and its long legs are 90, and the vertical is 60. There's nothing magic about that, but it's roughly a half wave on 160. That's a good place to start, but you may find that the length isn't exactly that, and especially if you're going to feed it at the base, it might be a little different too. I feed it at the base now. I used to feed it in the middle. Yes?
How far is your counterpart off the ground?
Just about this high, just so nobody gets their head cut off. We don't have tall wildlife in my neighborhood. The deer are all at the other end of our community, so I don't have that problem. But foxes, people, that's the extent. So I get it over my head, and that's good enough.
What about a vertical such as the R9 that says you don't have to have radio?
I can't speak for it, but I don't know that the R9 would work on 160, and we were talking about 160 here.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it has 160.
Does it? Well, I don't know. I'd defer to the manufacturer on that. I don't have any personal experience with it. I will tell you this, that my antenna is exceptionally far from ideal. It runs that far away from the tree. I mean, I try to keep it so it's not slapping up against the tree. So I do use bungee for that. I keep it away from the tree until it goes over. It runs through the branches of another tree on its way to its ultimate destination. The counterpoise runs through a bunch of small tree bush things that we have, decorative type ornamental trees on its way to its far end. So it's not pristine. I mean, I've got to compromise between cutting my wife's plants down and the antenna. I'm not going to do that. But point is, it doesn't have to be perfect. It gets me on 160. It gets me multipliers I would never see otherwise. And it makes some QSOs. And sometimes when conditions are good, and things are going to be good and getting better on the lower bands now, I make a surprising number of QSOs. I can run on 160, which is incredible. It's not, and so something simple like that worked for me. Any other questions?
Okay, long time about 160, what about an inverted V and coming down so far and going back up to the tower? I got an 80 meter dipole and inverted V. I came down more wire, let's say 2 feet, and brought that parallel back up, open-ended, up towards the tower.
I think you just have a broader band 80 meter antenna. I mean, it looks like you,
But I would see would be open though, if you kind of fold it up, but open.
well, once you start coupling back to the original element, you're going to make it look a little bit longer electrically, but you're not going to gain the full length of the wire that you add. The question was, could I take my inverted, he has an inverted V from his tower on 80 meters, and he's going to add another half wavelength worth of wire, quarter on each side, and fold it back and run it back up again. And it'll change the resonance of the antenna down a little bit, and it'll make it more broadband, but I wouldn't expect, I don't know, I wouldn't expect much different behavior than that. Now you can try, Alpha Delta sells an antenna where instead of traps they use coils, and the coils are self-resonant. And they make one, I think it's, I don't know, it's not a whole lot different from an 80 meter dipole, but they claim it works on 160. So, yeah. But what I was going to suggest is you might try making some, well, the problem is you don't want the currents. You could try loading up with a switch around it. You could try putting enough inductance that you would load the wire somehow. But you'd have to change at the feed point. You'd have to accommodate the impedance, and you'd have to be able to short that out. And I've seen people put coils at the base of the inverted V, where at the feed point, right around the feed point, and short them out for 80 meters. So I haven't tried that. Presumably it works, and your transmitter might like it. How well it radiates, I don't know.
As you say, you could use it as a T vertical at 160, short the coax and use it as a top loaded vertical.
But he's already got, his tower. His tower is the center support. So now you're going to have the vertical running up next to your metal support. And by the way, the T method of top loading is really tricky trying to get that to work right. You're much better off with an inverted L. I'd try running an inverted L from your tower.
I'd say ground radios,
Is your tower at the edge of your property or in the center of it?
right next to the house in the center, but my lot is very small.
Yeah.
I got a 10 through 80 vertical hustler, and I got radios in my yard, but they're kind of zigzag. I managed to get 625 feet of 25 radios at 25 feet in my yard. Someone would go like this on an angle or whatever, dominate it, but I got,
And they go to the base of your tower?
no, they don't go to base, they're just off the vertical itself.
How far is that from your tower?
20 feet.
Interesting. I don't know what to suggest other than trying to load, if you want to try to load the 80 meter antenna. But folding the wires back over wouldn't do you any good. Yes?
Well, I have that alpha delta antenna,
Yeah?
and I go to 160, 80, and 40.
Okay.
It's a kind of inverted V. Really, it's one leg works on 40 meters, and with a coil, it resonates on 160. The other is a quarter wave, 80 meter antenna. The first time I connected it to the top of the tower, I live in a high-rise building, it's a 9-floor building. And I put it to the tower, the 12-meter tower. It was very difficult to tune it. Then what I did is I run a kind of a insulated wire from the top of the tower to the ground, and I trim it. That seems like the other part. Like I can mention the other side of the side pole.
What did you, I'm sorry, you lost me. The conversation here is about using an alpha delta antenna that's made for, it has a leg that's 160 and 80 with a coil in it, and then another 20-meter dipole hung underneath it, right?
No, it's
40?
One leg is 40 and 160. Okay, and the other leg is just a full-size quarter wave for 80 meters.
Okay, so it's got an 80 meter, this,
80 meter quarter wave.
quarter wave.
Yes. And then it's like an 80 quarter wave antenna.
It's a quarter wave center fed?
Yes. And,
Well, how does that different from a 40 meter dipole?
it will. Well, the idea is that the brain box goes connected to the tower.
So it's not center fed. It's a half sloper. Okay, so it's a half sloper with an element that's 40 and 80 separated by a coil, by a trap essentially, and then you have the other one is an 80 meter quarter wave. Okay,
And that's it works. It fits in my place.
and that works, and it's made by Alpha Delta. Yeah. So the vertical part is 60 feet, 66 feet, something like
The
that.
vertical part is the tower.
Yeah, I understand. Right.
But the problem is to tune it. The way I found to tune it was to connect, instead to connect it to a tower, I connected to a wire that goes down along the tower, and I was able to trim it to resonance.
Oh, yeah. I would have expected to use a wire, not the tower with that. But it's coupled to the tower anyway. You know, understand that. So I'm presuming you hold it rigidly down and all that sort of thing. Is it, and you have an arm off the tower?
Yes, I have an arm.
Yeah. Yes?
One of those alpha delta requires your tri-band beam and your stack as a capacitive pad in conjunction with that wire antenna he's talking about. So there's like a 7 feet or something, it's gotta be down tuned in order for that antenna to work.
I'm not sure how that would affect anything but the vertical portion. I don't know. We're in the wrong forum for the detailed antenna discussions, but I can only tell you from my experience, I've seen all kinds of things work. If anything, that would make it appear electrically longer than it should be, so you could compensate for that by making it a bit longer. It's a capacity hat, but it's in the middle of the antenna, so it's a little strange. Yeah. Can you speak up a little bit? Frank's talking over.
Yeah, so in an urban environment where the noise floor is pretty high,
Yeah.
suggestions about finding noise sources outside your property?
Yeah, well, the question was, in an urban environment with a lot of noise around you, what would the suggestion be for finding noise sources? I use a Yacht Boy receiver, which is a shortwave receiver, and I use it on the AM broadcast band, and I also use it up as high as I can make it tune, 30 megahertz or so on AM. And I listen for the noise sources, and I walk around. I found 2 sources in one of my neighbor's houses and was able to fix them, and they were actually very obnoxious wall warts that I could hear at my house. And then we have a guy from the power company that's very good, but before we call him, another ham and I in the neighborhood go out with a 2-meter AM receiver that he has in the car, and we drive around and we find areas where the noise really peaks up and identify, we think it's in the area of this pole, or we think it's in the area of this transformer, whatever it is. So using a receiver, VHF receivers work very well for that. Try to use them on AM though. Or if you have a shortwave receiver that's portable, you can use that too. But I get the frequency down on those as low as I can to start out with. I'm just using the pole that comes on it, the extendable antenna on it. I'm not direction finding whether the wavelength's long. It's just going around to peak up the noise, and then once you're in the area, you can kind of turn it around. It's got a loop stick in it. I can push the antenna back in and use the loop stick. I'm out of time? We're out of time. Thank you very much.